Good evening, everybody. This is Mike from Cinema Homework, and Cody is not with me this evening, my co-host. I am flying solo on this one, and I just wanted to take a few minutes to do a few words on Suicide Squad, which I just came back from watching. What I can say is that the film is not the complete and total disaster that the critics are making it out to be. It's watchable, it moves, some of the characters are engaging, the direction is fine, it's nothing exceptional, it's nothing to write home about, but it's fine, it's passable. But all that being said, the film, like you have probably heard from many others, is just a mess. It's just a reactionary jumble of elements and ingredients thrown together in the desperate hopes of righting a ship that steered so far off course with Batman vs. Superman, and to a certain extent Man of Steel before it, that somewhere along the lines everybody just sort of forgot that they needed to just make a movie. Because really, these things are more than movies at this point in time. These are tent poles that Warner Brothers as a corporation is desperately, desperately counting on to try to prop up the value of the entire company and the portfolio of characters and intellectual properties that they own. And these are vastly valuable properties. I mean, arguably, you have three of the most recognizable, merchandisable, and valuable pieces of media in the world right now, in Batman and Superman especially. And even though the film that they managed to make with those two heroes was wrong-headed and very ill-conceived in every way, I have to say that at least that movie, at least Batman vs. Superman, was somewhat of an honest film. And let me explain what I mean when I say that. I mean that the film that you saw, whether you saw the theatrical cut, whether you saw the Ultimate Edition that's 30 more minutes of crap, whichever one, that was at least the movie that, in my opinion, for better or worse, the director, Zack Snyder, set out to make. I didn't like it. I don't think most people liked it. I think that even the people who say that they like it are really projecting their hopes and dreams onto it more than anything else. I can't believe that anybody actually looks at that film and thinks it's anything but horribly flawed in so many ways, whether you actually enjoy it or not. Because nobody wanted that movie to be good more than I did. Trust me. But anyway, it was at least the movie, more or less, that I believe Snyder wanted to make. And once that came out, and once the public and everyone reacted to it the way they did, both with the critical reception and with people voting with their wallets, which certainly didn't get them to the $1 billion mark that they wanted to get to. Once that happened, Warner Brothers did what they do so well, what they've done for decades, if you've followed any of this and any of the rest of their productions from any sort of an actual film production standpoint. What they did was they panicked. And they took this movie, Suicide Squad, directed by David Ayer, that was more or less in the can, and they realized that, oh my God, we've got to answer some of these criticisms, and we've got to tear this thing apart and try to make it into something that the people want to see. Well, had they done that before the movie was written, before it entered production, when there was time to actually make it into something else, maybe that would have worked. Instead, what they did was take this movie and stuff as many cooks into the kitchen as they could, and I'm sure you've all read the behind-the-scenes stories and that state, or that allege, that there were multiple edits floating around, multiple editors working on it at a time. There was millions of dollars in reshoots. And so all they really managed to do was take a movie that was, in my opinion, at best ill-conceived in the first place, and make it into just an incoherent mess that ends up pleasing nobody. There were some chuckles, and there was a bit of audience response with the audience I saw it with, but nobody walked out of that movie saying, "Oh man, that was awesome. That was the best Joker I've ever seen. That was everything I would want out of a movie like this," because it's not. And yes, this is just my opinion here. I'm just trying to be as objective as I can, even though I do have some emotional investment in some of these characters, not necessarily the ones from Suicide Squad, but certainly the big three in the DC universe. But I'm a filmmaker myself. I've made a few films. I know how difficult every part of the process is. I know that movies can be made or broken in the editing room. I know that a film can be completely changed into something that it was never intended to be in the editing room. And I'm honestly trying to think of another instance where a major film underwent this kind of tampering and restructuring to this degree this late in the game, because it's readily apparent. It's up there on the screen. I mean, there's no way this is the movie that David Ayer wanted to make. And I know he's backing the studio. I know he said that the cut that's out there is his cut, and maybe it is. I don't know. You know, maybe the film that he wanted to make was compromised from day one and didn't really ever have a shot at being great, because I don't know. The whole thing, it came as a very it came at a very odd place in the slate of films that they've announced. I mean, they decide that they're going to do this shared universe. They make Man of Steel, which was a very reactionary Superman movie. It was basically just a reaction to everything that people claimed that they didn't get in Superman Returns. But it had its moments. I liked a lot of Man of Steel. And it made enough money for them to go forward. So, boom. Let's greenlight Batman versus Superman. Let's throw Batman into the mix just to make sure that we can leapfrog over all the legwork that Marvel did in building their universe and just shoehorn it all into one thing and try to launch it that way. It's a bad plan, but it could have worked if the film had been good. But we know how that turned out, and now I've seen how Suicide Squad turned out. And when I said a moment ago that the whole thing was the timing of making this movie in the midst of the slate where they did, it was an unusual thing. I mean, I can't imagine that anybody thought that making a movie about supervillains when you haven't yet done a movie about Wonder Woman, you haven't yet done a movie about Aquaman, you haven't yet done a movie about The Flash. Yes, I know that they're on the slate, but don't you think this is something that maybe should have come a little later? It's very similar to the idea that Sony had to make that Sinister Six movie when they were still in the midst of the Andrew Garfield Spider-Man series. And the whole thing behind that, who wanted to see a Sinister Six movie? But Sony was kind of, they were very limited in what they could do because they only owned a certain stable of characters, which namely was anyone who was connected to Spider-Man. They didn't have a lot of other heroes to go play around with. Warner Brothers owns everything DC. They could have done anything they wanted to. Maybe part of it was the fact that they saw what Marvel did with Guardians of the Galaxy and taking this lesser-known ragtag bunch of misfits and turning it into something that surprised everybody by being one of the most fun movies that they've ever done. But I find that hard to believe, too, because there's no way that this was conceived as anything even approaching a fun movie. Even from 8 o'clock day one, before the studio's fingers got in the pie and they took it away from Ayer or put two different teams of editors on it, there's no way that this movie was, ever conceived as fun to begin with. But after the reaction to Batman vs. Superman, that's what this had to be in the studio's eyes. Everybody hates this dark, morose tone. We've got to make this fun. Well, fine. you probably should have thought of that before you made it. And honestly, the fact that you just went and made a Batman versus Superman movie, a movie with Batman and Superman that I can't take my young kids to because it's too dark and scary and grim and violent, maybe you should have spent a few more minutes thinking about that in the first place. But I digress to a point. As far as Suicide Squad goes, the movie is just all over the place. Margot Robbie's fun. Will Smith is Will Smith. They're doing the best they can. I'm not even going to really attempt to break down all the holes in the plot, and because, you know, there's too many holes in that dike for me to even attempt to put my finger in all of them just to rattle them off to you. I mean, the fact that the team is formed to combat threats, and the very threat that it ends up combating is a threat that never would have existed had the squad not been formed. Spoilers, by the way, for anybody who hasn't seen this yet. Having Enchantress as the main villain, I mean, it just seems to me like that whole situation was avoidable because you had her locked up in prison, you had her heart in a box, and because something might happen in the future, you throw her on a team with a bunch of other superpowered convicted felons, and, you know, well, this shit happens, and I guess, you know, I guess they should have thought of that more. But that's just, I mean, that's really just the tip of the iceberg. The point I'm trying to make is that people can dissect the actual plot of this movie all they want. You either run with it and enjoy it for what it is, or you don't. And I don't know that there was ever a version of this script that made any more sense. But, you know, not every movie has to make 100% sense. Not every plot has to be free of holes. I can name you dozens of movies that don't stand up to any kind of scrutiny that I love and watch over and over. But I think what sets those movies apart from this is that at least they were honest. Like I described earlier, they were the movies that whatever filmmaker that made them wanted to make to some extent. I don't believe this is a movie that anybody really wanted to make. I don't believe that anybody's vision is represented up here on screen. There might be 150 people's vision that's represented, but there was never a hand steering the wheel of that ship in a clear enough direction to make it anything but just cacophonous and loud and extremely, extremely dark and depressing, no matter how much pretty window dressing they put on it in the form of the end titles and the colorful graphics and the little insert shots with 47 text boxes on the screen that it just made everything that much more incomprehensible in my opinion. But, so I guess, to sum it all up, I'm not going to go on and on about this. I just wanted to get a few thoughts out while they were fresh in my head. But honestly, I think that the DC Universe is probably in more trouble than anybody's ever going to let on. Yes, Wonder Woman's pretty much in the can, although there's plenty of time, you know, between now and then for them to stick their fingers in there and tamper with stuff there too. I know there's Justice League being shot. I guarantee you that movie is being shot by committee in the worst kind of way because Snyder is in no way, manner, fashion, or form trusted enough by anybody over at Warner Brothers right now to actually make his vision and to deliver a film that will be what they think the fans want. And, you know, they're probably right about that, honestly. I think the entire decision to put him at the helm of the ship in the first place was ill-conceived at best. But I'm going to go on record right now, you know, in August 2016, and say that I don't think we'll ever see an Aquaman movie. I don't think we'll ever see a Flash movie. I certainly don't think we'll ever see a Cyborg movie. I think unless Justice League comes and knocks it out of the park, which it's got a whole lot of chips stacked against it to be able to do that, a whole lot. No matter how well-intentioned everyone is. But I think unless that happens, unless we see $1 billion plus gross for Justice League, I think this is all going to be swept under the rug and go back to the drawing board. And I hope I'm wrong. I hope I'm wrong about all this. I want to see a Flash movie. I sort of want to see an Aquaman movie. I'm sure it could be... Well, heck, if Marvel can do Ant-Man and do Guardians of the Galaxy well, surely somebody should be able to do something with Aquaman. But I just think that Warner Brothers needs to get out of its own way, which I don't know if they're capable of doing as a studio right now. This is the way that they've operated for so many years. I don't think they know anything else. I think they're scared, and what happens when you're scared? You panic. What happens when you panic? You tend to cause everybody around you to panic. And panic doesn't go well with creative types. It creates chaos. And, chaos in this case is probably the enemy of good filmmaking and good entertainment. And I really hope I'm wrong. But one other thing I want to say to people who are hardcore defenders of this DC universe we've seen. Look, if you like these movies, I envy you. That's great. I want to like these movies. Nobody wanted to like Batman vs. Superman more than I did. Nobody wanted to like Man of Steel more than I did. And I still like bits and pieces of Man of Steel. But those of you who are just simply blindly defending the decisions that are being made there and just following WB like lemmings and just lapping up whatever shit that they decide to serve to you just so you can say that, DC is a player and that they're competitive and they're blowing Marvel out of the water. Look, none of that matters at the end of the day. We need to be voting with our wallets, and we need to be demanding good films. Nobody wants to see these characters in bad films that make shit tons of money. At least I don't. I mean, maybe some people do. Maybe some people, again, honestly think that these are good films. I'm sure that they do. Cody, my co-host, I haven't talked to him at length about it yet. He really enjoyed Suicide Squad. And that's great. I'm sure we'll do an episode, down the road where he and I both can go and really break that down and unpack it and get into why. Because I really want to know why. Because he's a guy whose opinion I hold in high regard. We have vastly different tastes in a lot of ways. But, he's my co-host for a reason. It's my friend for a reason. I respect the guy. I want to know what he thinks about this. Because what I think about it is that it's just a fucking mess. And if you were to drop me in the middle of this, in Jeff Johns' shoes, and say, here's a blank check. Go right this ship. Go figure out what's wrong and fix it. I don't know that I would know how to do it. I don't envy that guy. I don't envy any of these guys. I don't envy Snyder. I don't envy James Wan. I don't envy whatever the guy is making the Flash movie now that the first director walked out. I don't envy Patty Jenkins. I think she might. I really hope that this is not the case, but I'm afraid that next year she's going to be put in the same position that David Ayer is, and I really do. I really hope that's not true. I'm not trying to doom and gloom and be pessimistic and naysay any of this because I want these movies to work. I want them to be good. In my opinion, so far, they're just not. And that's my rant. That's what I've got to say about it. I'd love to hear what you guys think. Leave me comments here. Visit us at cinemahomework.com. Send us email comments at cinemahomeworkpodcast@gmail.com. Tweet us at cinemahomework1 on Twitter, and let me know what you think. We will see you guys later. Next time, we're going to be back to our standard format, and we'll do a normal episode. Until then, have a good night.